Before the rooster crowed, before the first light touched the rooftops of Ouagadougou, something happened that shook not only a city, not only a nation, but an entire continent. While families still slept and the streets lay silent, the order was given. And in that moment, Ibrahim Traoré strikes at dawn. 17 facilities scattered across the capital were struck in perfect unison. They looked harmless from the outside. Aid organizations, development offices, technology hubs. But behind the glass doors and painted signs lay something far darker. Inside were servers, routers, hidden cables, machines built not to serve the people but to spy on them. In a single morning, more than 2 million records were secured. 2 million stories, 2 million identities, 2 million lives pulled back from the shadow of exploitation. My brothers and sisters, let us pause right here. For what does it mean when your name, your voice, your fingerprint, your very life is stored far from your homeland? What does it mean when your choices are mapped, your minerals cataloged, your leaders recorded? Not for your benefit, but for the designs of strangers. It means that sovereignty itself is placed in chains. This, beloved, is no ordinary news item. This is a turning point. And tonight we are going to walk through it together. We will revisit that morning strike. We will unveil the hidden empire that stretched across Africa. We will examine the reactions that swept the continent, and we will look to the road ahead. But before we begin this journey, I ask you, if your heart beats for Africa's freedom, if you believe in the power of truth told without fear, then subscribe to this channel. Join us. Stand with us. For Africa bows to no one. The sun had not yet risen when the order was spoken. It was 5 in the morning, a quiet hour when the city of Ouagadougou still dreamed. But by 7, the silence had been broken by a storm that no one saw coming. Convoys of black vehicles moved swiftly through narrow streets. Soldiers in disciplined formation approached guarded gates, and helicopters circled above government blocks. In that hour, the capital became the stage for what would later be called Operation Clear Sight. 17 targets. Not 1, not 2, 17. Each location struck at the same precise moment, leaving no time for warning, no chance for escape. Officials would later describe it as surgical, silent, and swift. Yet what they uncovered was anything but silent. Behind the facade of humanitarian logos and the language of development aid, they found something that spoke volumes about betrayal, about exploitation, about the theft of a people's dignity. On the eastern edge of the city stood a glass-paneled office. To passers-by, it looked like a digital agriculture NGO, an organization promising to bring efficiency to farming, data to help crops grow, technology to serve the poor. But when the doors were broken open and investigators stepped inside, the truth came pouring out. Racks of servers, encrypted routers, concealed satellite uplinks, machines humming not with the rhythm of service, but with the cold pulse of espionage. 2 blocks away from the Ministry of Education, another discovery chilled the heart. A low warehouse, unremarkable on the outside, held the identities of a nation within its walls. There, under the dust of 8 years, were databases stretching back to millions of calls, names, addresses, biometric scans. The evidence was overwhelming. There were 2 million profiles seized, stored not for the benefit of Burkina Faso, but for transmission abroad. 2 million lives digitized, categorized, and exported like a resource, like a commodity to be traded. By 8:45 a.m., all 17 sites were secured. Investigators cataloged fiber maps showing regional telecom backbones feeding directly to overseas relays. They opened encrypted drives containing minutes of cabinet meetings intercepted in secret. They uncovered satellite imagery of mineral-rich zones, mapped with military precision and matched with files traced to Tel Aviv. In one folder, they found the coordinates of gold and manganese deposits cross-checked against international databases. This was not random. This was not coincidence. This was a system. And the people began to whisper. Videos filmed on cell phones spread like wildfire. Footage of troops removing servers, of trucks filled with hard drives, of helicopters circling above the ministries. On the streets, the first words of anger turned to chants, and the chants turned into slogans. Our data, our choice. Africa is not for sale. My brothers and sisters understand this. Never before had a West African nation moved so boldly, so publicly, against such an invisible empire. Dr. Samuel Kabore, a security scholar at the University of Ouagadougou, said it clearly. This was not symbolic. This was decisive. It was the reclaiming of national systems that had been quietly stolen. And yet the questions multiplied. Was Burkina Faso acting alone? Could it be that similar facilities existed in Lagos, in Nairobi, in Addis Ababa? If this was the scale in one city, what was the scope across the continent? The morning raid had done more than expose hidden hardware. It had cracked open 15 years of history. 15 years of contracts signed in smiles, of aid delivered with conditions, of cables laid with hidden pathways. 15 years of infiltration cloaked in the language of progress. But here's the truth, beloved. You can cut through darkness in a single dawn. You can silence a network in one morning if the people are ready to act. Operation Clearsight was not only about seizing machines. It was about declaring that Africa's silence had ended. Yet even as evidence piled high, another question rose higher still. Who was behind this web? Who had woven the threads of this secret network across nations, across ministries, across borders? Who claimed the power to turn sovereignty into an illusion? Hold on to that question because the next chapter does not merely reveal facilities or hardware. It lifts the veil on a hidden empire stretching back 15 years, reaching from West Africa to East Africa, and pointing directly to the heart of foreign powers. Stay with me, beloved, for the story is only beginning. When the dust settled from the morning raids, what had been uncovered was not just hardware, not just stolen drives, not just intercepted files. It was a window into something far larger, something that stretched across borders and across years. For nearly 15 years, companies linked to foreign powers had walked into Africa wearing the robes of development. But beneath those robes lay the instruments of occupation. They came with promises of progress. They promised connectivity, efficiency, education, even security. They installed fiber optic cables and shiny servers. They opened offices in Lagos, Nairobi, Addis Ababa, and Accra. They were applauded by ministers, blessed in ceremonies, welcomed with open arms. But behind the applause, hidden codes worked silently. Telecom hubs rerouted ministerial phone calls. Biometric databases meant for voter registration were copied in silence. Surveillance cameras in markets and bus stations fed facial recognition systems abroad. The maps of our minerals, the images of our lands, the voices of our leaders, all of it exported, packaged, stored in servers thousands of miles away. My brothers and sisters, this was not aid. This was not partnership. As Dr. Fatou Diallo from Dakar declared, this is exploitation rebranded. This is occupation without boots, a colony built on cables. And when the raids of Ouagadougou pulled the mask away, the world saw what had been hidden for a decade and a half. It was not an isolated scandal. It was the unveiling of a system. Then came the call. Within 24 hours of the operation, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel picked up the phone. The call lasted 12 minutes. On one end, a leader defending his nation's dignity. On the other, a leader defending 15 years of quiet intrusion. Netanyahu insisted that what had been done in Africa was developmental, not espionage. He cautioned that Burkina Faso risked destabilizing West Africa itself. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré, standing firm in the conviction of sovereignty, answered with words that will be remembered. There is no misunderstanding when you spy on us. That is not development. That is occupation. The call ended without agreement, without apology, without reconciliation. One leader sought to downplay, the other to declare. And in that moment, Africa's stance became unmistakable. But Traoré was not standing alone. In Bamako, Malian officials shut down 3 foreign firms under suspicion. In Niamey, authorities exposed a surveillance compound hidden within embassy walls. In Conakry, Guinea froze military imports tied to Israeli suppliers. In Lomé, Togo suspended telecom contracts pending investigation. What began as one nation's act had turned into a regional uprising. 2 days later, 6 heads of state gathered in Ouagadougou, behind closed doors away from international cameras. On that table lay a folder thick with evidence, the servers, the maps, the intercepted files. And around that table was born something new, a framework for digital sovereignty. 4 pillars. First, no foreign investment in telecom without complete transparency of infrastructure, ownership, and software. Second, all citizen data must be stored on servers physically within African soil. No exceptions, no loopholes. Third, any undeclared intelligence activity by a foreign entity would trigger immediate expulsion and the removal of diplomatic cover. And fourth, an attack on one nation's digital sovereignty would be treated as an attack on all, demanding a collective continental response. The words of Ghana's president echoed, "We must build oversight councils not of politicians but of engineers, jurists, and citizens." The representatives of Togo insisted it must be binding, not symbolic. And by the end of the summit, signatures marked a page that would later be compared to the Monroe Doctrine, not in the 19th century United States, but in 21st century Africa, reborn for the digital age. Crowds across the region echoed this shift. Students in Bamako marched with banners, "Africa is not for sale." Mothers in Conakry held placards reading, "Digital sovereignty is national sovereignty." Activists in Ouagadougou painted walls with the words, "Our data, our choice." It was no longer simply about the morning raids. It was about dignity, about unity, about a continent saying no. But with every step forward, the question grew louder. Would Africa's boldness bring about lasting freedom, or would it provoke the heavy hand of retaliation? Could these principles of sovereignty survive the pressure of sanctions, the manipulation of media, the weight of external powers? Beloved, the dawn had revealed the hidden empire. The call had exposed the confrontation. The summit had lit the torch of doctrine. Yet the real battle was only beginning. Because after the fire of revelation must come the long march of consequence. Stay with me now, for in the next part, we will walk into the aftermath. We will see how this strike at dawn reshaped economies, inspired movements, lowered costs, and lit a new hope. But we will also ask, will this hope endure or will it be crushed beneath the machinery of the old order? 6 months after the dawn raid, the streets of Ouagadougou carried a different rhythm. Markets bustled with chatter, university halls buzzed with debate, and internet cafes glowed late into the night. Something had shifted, not just in government halls, not just in military reports, but in the very heartbeat of society. Officials released numbers that startled even the skeptics. Internet speeds had doubled. The cost of data had been cut nearly in half. Cybersecurity breaches, once routine, had fallen by 47%. It was not merely a technical improvement, it was a reordering of daily life. Families streamed lessons without interruption. Traders checked prices in real time. Doctors held consultations with rural patients. And new players were stepping into the space once dominated by foreign giants. In Accra, a Ghanaian startup launched a cloud platform certified under the sovereignty rules. In Lagos, a fintech company announced it would relocate its servers from Europe back to Nigeria, declaring, "Our data, our destiny." In Ouagadougou, engineers trained under emergency programs opened the city's first locally owned data center. The faces of these ventures were young, determined, and proud. For years, local entrepreneurs had been sidelined by multinationals with deeper pockets. Now, under new laws, they found the field open and the demand hungry. But the consequences were not only economic. They were cultural, emotional, spiritual. At universities, students began to speak of the second independence. Independence not of land, but of data. In the markets, vendors spoke of sovereignty as naturally as they spoke of harvests and seasons. "My rights," one trader said, "are not only in my field, but in my phone." Street walls became canvases of rebellion and pride. In Bamako, murals depicted chains of data shattered by African hands. In Johannesburg, graffiti declared, "No cloud unless it's ours." In Nairobi, students painted a server breaking free from shackles beneath the words, "Our data, our choice." It was no longer the language of experts alone. It was the language of the people. Civil society groups carried the torch further. Activist organizations began workshops teaching citizens about digital rights, about privacy, about the meaning of sovereignty in a world of invisible wires. For the first time, communities saw cyberspace not as abstract, but as territory to be defended, as much a homeland as the land beneath their feet. And the political landscape shifted as well. Within the African Union, momentum grew toward enshrining digital sovereignty as a continental principle. Delegates in Addis Ababa spoke long into the night, arguing not only for resolutions but for enforcement, for audits, for legal frameworks binding on all. Nigeria's representative made the chamber erupt when he declared, "If one nation's data is stolen, all nations are betrayed." Yet, beloved, not all consequences were without challenge. Western companies complained of impossible conditions and began to withdraw. Some governments warned of sanctions. Editorials in European capitals described the doctrine as isolationist, radical, destabilizing. Within Africa, questions arose. Could the new data centers be secured against cyber attacks? Could local engineers maintain infrastructure without falling into new dependencies? Could the unity displayed in the summit endure under economic pressure? These questions linger, but what is undeniable is the change in spirit. For the first time in decades, Africa is not waiting to be invited to the table. Africa is building its own table, setting its own rules, choosing its own partners. Beloved, let me ask you this. Do you believe this second independence is real? Do you see in these changes the beginning of a future where Africa controls not only its land, but its data, its knowledge, its destiny? Or do you fear, as some do, that the fire may flicker when the winds of foreign pressure blow stronger? Write your thoughts below. Speak your heart, for your voice is part of this story. And stay with me, for the next chapter takes us to the world beyond. Because as Africa rises, the eyes of America, of Europe, of the West are fixed upon her. And their reactions, their headlines, their warnings may well decide whether this movement thrives or falters. As the dust of Operation Clearsight spread beyond Ouagadougou, the ripples reached the desks of foreign ministries and the headlines of global newspapers. And here, beloved, is where the story took on two very different faces. In Paris, the press wrote of Captain Ibrahim Traoré as authoritarian, a strongman unsettling fragile balances. In London, editorials warned of a radical doctrine emerging in West Africa. In Washington, think tanks drafted reports labeling him a destabilizing force, a threat not only to regional stability but to international investment norms. The chorus of Western capitals was cautious, wary, and often dismissive. Behind the closed doors of diplomacy, pressure mounted. In Brussels, European Union officials warned that sanctions might follow if African nations insisted on rules that violated investment rights. In Washington, the State Department urged restraint, calling for dialogue, while quietly reminding allies of their economic leverage. France, visibly displeased, suspended certain training programs for Burkina Faso forces, citing erosion of trust. The message was clear: stand down, soften your stance, or pay the price. But beyond the Atlantic world, a very different tone emerged. In Beijing, the Global Times described the doctrine as a turning point, a declaration of African technological independence. In Moscow, commentators hailed the raids as proof of Western hypocrisy exposed. In New Delhi, officials announced readiness to build data centers across Africa, promising both infrastructure and training. Suddenly, Africa was no longer a silent recipient of aid. It was a negotiator, a partner courted by East and West alike. Even the media war mirrored this divide. Western outlets repeated the narrative of instability. African networks broadcast live debates on sovereignty. Al Jazeera called it the unveiling of a hidden empire. Independent journalists in Lagos revealed how algorithms built abroad had influenced fuel pricing, further fueling public anger. And online, hashtags like #OurDataOurChoice and #AfricaNotForSale trended across platforms, drowning out dismissive foreign commentary. For the first time in decades, the tables seemed to turn. Africa was not begging for recognition. Recognition was being demanded of Africa. As one Ghanaian official declared, "The world is at our table now. We will decide the rules." But beloved, let us not be naive. Power never shifts without resistance. While Africa writes a new chapter, powerful interests sharpen their pens, their sanctions, their strategies. The doctrine of digital sovereignty has ignited hope, but it has also invited confrontation. And so the question rises, what lies ahead? Can this fragile unity endure? Can Africa translate doctrine into durable policy, or will external forces fracture its resolve? Stay with me, for in the next chapter we will look to the road ahead, the challenges, the opportunities, and the vision of a continent determined to hold its digital destiny in its own hands. Beloved, when Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood at the podium and declared that Africa would no longer be anyone's laboratory, he was not simply speaking to one nation. He was speaking to generations, to ancestors who fought for independence with blood, and to descendants who must now defend it with data. What emerged from Ouagadougou was more than a doctrine. It was, in the words of observers, a Monroe Doctrine for the digital age. In the 19th century, America declared that foreign powers could no longer claim dominion in its hemisphere. Now, in the 21st, Africa has declared that its digital borders, its servers, its fiber cables, and its streams of data are no less sacred than its soil and rivers. But a doctrine is not enough. Words must be built into walls, into laws, into living institutions. And here lies the challenge. To secure sovereignty, Africa must build data centers that cannot be breached, train engineers who cannot be bribed, enforce audits that cannot be manipulated. It must withstand sanctions, the whispers of destabilization, the pressure of corporations whose profits depend on opacity. This is not a battle of a day, it is the work of decades. Yet within that struggle lies the seed of transformation. Already, startups once ignored are rising. Governments once dependent are negotiating as equals. The African Union is moving toward enshrining digital sovereignty as a collective principle, binding nations together in a shared shield. And youth, oh the youth, are seizing this vision as their own. For them, independence is not a story of the past, but a battle of the present. To be fought not with rifles in fields, but with servers in cities, with laws in parliaments, with knowledge in classrooms. Make no mistake, beloved, the path will be steep. There will be attempts to divide. There will be temptations of quick money and shortcuts. There will be storms of propaganda and threats of punishment. But there will also be moments of breakthrough. Cheaper internet, stronger trust, local industries rising from the ground up. And so we stand at the threshold of possibility. Will Africa hold firm and transform its doctrine into destiny? Will the dream of digital sovereignty endure as a pillar of governance, or will it fade as rhetoric under the weight of old powers? Stay with me now, for in the final part we will gather all these threads. The strike, the empire revealed, the reactions, the consequences, the doctrine, and we will look to the horizon. We will ask not only what has been done, but what must be done if Africa is to rise not in silence, but in strength. Beloved, we began this journey in the stillness before sunrise, when the order was given and the world changed. That morning, Ibrahim Traoré strikes at dawn, and in a single sweep, 17 hidden fortresses fell. Behind their polished signs and false banners, a hidden empire was exposed, and from the shadows emerged 2 million stories, 2 million lives reclaimed. Yes, 2 million profiles seized, secured not for strangers, but for the people to whom they belong. But what does this moment mean? It means that sovereignty is no longer confined to maps and borders. Sovereignty now lives in fiber cables, in servers, in data streams. It means that the independence our forefathers won on battlefields must now be defended in cyberspace, in courtrooms, in code. 6 months have shown us glimpses of what is possible. Faster internet, lower costs, rising startups, a new confidence spreading across markets and campuses alike. Yet the road ahead is long. External powers will resist, corporations will fight, old empires will try to return in new disguises. The question is not whether they will try, the question is whether Africa will stand. So I ask you, my brothers and sisters, will this moment be remembered as the dawn of a second independence, or as a spark that flickered and died? Will our children inherit a continent that bows to no one, or a continent once more deceived by promises of aid? If your heart beats for Africa's freedom, then do not stand silent. Write your thoughts in the comments below. Speak your truth, for silence is surrender. And if you believe in this message, if you believe in the power of Africa to rise again, then subscribe to this channel. Join us. Stand with us. Let us declare together, Africa bows to no one. Because, beloved, history will remember. History will not forget that morning when Ibrahim Traoré strikes at dawn, and Africa chose to lift its head, not in fear but in strength.